And we are live on Facebook. Hey everyone, it's Morna Haist here, the founder of Revolutionary Woman Global. And today I'm joined by the amazing Dr. Mary Miller, who's joining us from New Zealand. Hey Mary.
Hi, how are you? Very nice to be here from a little rainy Auckland today.
Little rainy Auckland. I love that. And I am just, as we're getting settled in here, I'm just going to share the video into the Revolutionary Woman group, which I can only ever do by narrating it as I go. And then I'll type in 3 5 with Mary Miller. Okay, so we're ready to go. So welcome everyone again to day, whatever it is, of this little experiment that I've been running of inviting some of the most amazing women I know from around the planet into these little 15-minute blocks with 3 questions, although it's pretty much turned out to be 3 to 5 questions most days. So you're joining us from New Zealand, Mary. What day and time is it?
It is, even I have to think about that. It is a Thursday at 10 a.m.
Thursday
in
at 10
lockdown, every day is the same, right?
Wow, so let's start there. So for those of you who don't know, I'm tuning in from Canada, the west coast of Canada, BC, where it is Wednesday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Let's actually start with the COVID situation in New Zealand. For those folks who don't know anything about New Zealand, it's interesting, a kind of bubble of COVID response there, and you've been in and continue to be in a pretty hefty lockdown. What are things like in New Zealand COVID-wise? What's your experience? And especially as a clinical psychologist, what are you noticing in yourself and in the people that are around you?
I think that after New Zealand has had a particularly unique kind of journey through this experience, in the sense that I think our geographical isolation and who happened to be in charge at the time gave us a particular response where we shut down really early and pursued a really aggressive elimination strategy, which means that our lockdowns are, I think, the most strict in the world when they happen. But we've also had these huge periods of time with relative freedom, with things looking very much like normal, apart from the fact that you can't leave the country, so luckily it's quite pretty here and nice to live in. And also that people can't come and visit, as you know, Morna, I know that you've been impacted by that as well. So there's been this sense of safety and protection, but also some kind of heartache and distance, especially for many of us with people overseas who've watched events unfold. And I guess all of that kind of came to a bit of an abrupt end when we got another kind of incursion through our border system of one person, and we were kind of, for a very brief time, the laughing stock of the world, where the whole country goes down over one case, right? And everyone's like, oh, that's a bit weird. But that case blew out to be just over 1,000. Wow. From all the contacts from that one particular incursion. It just shows you how virulent the virus is at this point, the Delta virus we have here. And we've had 5 weeks of that very strict lockdown, and the numbers have come down massively. Like, we have about 20 new cases a day at the moment, which I'm sure to many other people sounds tiny. But actually, if you're pursuing an elimination strategy, that's not. And so we've started releasing some of our restrictions here. And that's the first time that it's happened. And there's a sense that we're shifting strategy, that we're relying on increasing vaccination rates to provide protection. And actually, I think quite a lot of people are feeling pretty anxious at the moment. And that's definitely what I'm seeing in my work. I work as a clinical psychologist. I do one-on-one therapy, but I also deliver workshops. And in both those settings, there's definitely a higher sense of vulnerability, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, let's pick up on that, Mary. It's interesting. Also hear from, I was actually in New Zealand for the very first lockdown. So I've got a flavour and a taste for what it was like. And now, being back in BC for, I guess, the best part of 18 months since then, where we've been in, I guess, kind of an in-between strategy pretty much the whole time. It's some level of lockdown, certainly not full freedom, and have, I guess, for the most part, really lived with the virus, I think. And it is curious to hear that the elimination strategy may be starting to shift. It doesn't surprise me, and I think it probably doesn't surprise a lot of people. And also, it doesn't surprise me at all that people might be experiencing anxiety and different levels of anxiety. What can we do in times like this when we don't have the maybe some of access to some of the support systems we might have, especially when folks are needing to stay in their own environment or are limited in who they can contact? And then, we start to experience the anxiety that comes with not knowing and with the very real, I guess, threat of the virus.
Yeah.
What do we do, Mary?
We do. I wish I had all the answers to that.
I know, so do we. Yeah, in the next 3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 minutes examples. I have some ideas, and I think that the first is just to acknowledge, actually, I think it's a pretty rational response to the situation, right? That we don't have to make ourselves wrong for having those feelings. And that first step of actually just acknowledging and validating our own response can just help take some of the sting out, that second level that we often then get caught up in, the story about it, or that, especially for people who work in maybe even the area of personal development and growth, that maybe we shouldn't be having those feelings. We should have all the tools just to kind of bypass that discomfort. So I think there's a real strength in that acknowledgement and validation that is how it is right now, not to struggle against that. That's our role as being a human. So I think that would be my first acknowledgement. And often I think when life is really busy, and if we're not directly impacted at that moment by something like COVID, it can be easy to kind of dismiss it, actually, and to think about all the other things and label them as the things that are causing the anxiety, and maybe blaming ourselves at that point in some way. So I think, acknowledging the presence, that it's an unusual situation, that there are real risks and dangers and a lot of unknown. And I think with that uncertainty is such an interesting thing. Like, we all tend to struggle with it, unless you're someone who really thrives on a completely dynamic and chaotic kind of environment. But for most of us who appreciate a bit of rhythm and routine and predictability, uncertainty is frightening. And when we go to that place of being frightened, we go to our amygdala response in our mind. And really, that part of our brain is a survival machine. And so it's finally attuned to notice any danger and to make us pay attention to it, just in case we miss it and then we end up as lunch somehow, we get eaten up, whatever was the danger. But it's just useful to know that our mind has that bias. So it's going to notice and predict and catastrophize the worst possible outcome. But if we know that about ourselves, that as a human we do that, and it comes from this evolutionary place, we can then also check in and ask ourselves, well, what would a neutral outcome be? What would a positive outcome be? It doesn't mean that the dangerous thing might not happen, but it just helps contextualize it again.
That piece, that contextualization, piece, I think, is so important. I think sometimes there's this idea that, firstly, feeling anxiety is something we're not supposed to feel, and so then we have that double whammy of, I'm supposed to feel good all the time. I'm not supposed to feel anxiety. We sort of maybe, we in the general sense, pathologize. Is that the right word? Some normal human responses.
Normal human response.
And of course, I understand that there's a level of anxiety that isn't useful, that may be on the problematic end of the scale that we may need to unpack and work with. However, on an everyday basis, I agree that anxiety is there to tell us something. And so how can we work with it and sort of check it out?
I prefer to think about it like a volume dial.
Right.
Like, where's the volume? So it's not about getting rid of, or fully having it, but how do we turn down the volume, and what sort of things turn up the volume?
Right. Which I think is, that's really interesting, isn't it? Especially as I think a little bit of an antidote to some of the messaging out there, which kind of does, I think, position so much of this in the black and white space. If you're, it's the fear versus love thing. I don't know if you've seen this, it's particularly prevalent in the social media spaces, but, there's the whole vaccine or not vaccine, and that, worrying about COVID is a fear response, that we don't need to be worried and we should just all love, and et cetera, et cetera. Which is interesting in and of itself. And I'm actually just noticing, because I can see two screens here, and I've got us live, and then I've got a little bit of a spinning wheel of doom on the right-hand side, which is our live video. So I have no idea whether we're live here or not, but we're going to continue.
We're live.
We're live. Well, we're live. So let's continue. Mary, I think that's all really interesting, and I want to ask my third and final question, which is going to be my first question, which is really honing in on an area of your expertise and an area that you're really focusing in on your work, which is this idea of fierce compassion. What is it, firstly? I'm giving myself permission to ask multiple questions within the one. What is it, and how can it be useful for us at this particular moment, this time that we're in?
Yeah, great question. I like the it stuck a few into one. That's a good question technique. Yeah.
Thank you.
I really love my work with compassion, but what I've noticed through that is that often people have an initial misperception of what compassion is about, but it's about being nice or kind or kind of endlessly kind of patient in some way. And I think that kind of limits how we can use compassion in our life. So fierce compassion really emphasizes the strength that's really required for true compassion. And so when we think about compassion, there's really two main components: that awareness and ability to recognize suffering. So that might be our own suffering or other people's suffering. And if we think about, being really honest about our own suffering, that can take real bravery.
Yeah.
To look at ourselves really in the mirror. Yeah. And then the second component of compassion is then the action to help relieve that suffering. So I think about compassion as almost being like a verb. It's something that we have to do to put it into practice. And when we take that action, that might take us out of our comfort zone. Yeah, it might feel uncomfortable. It might be actually that there's a short-term challenge for a longer-term gain. And so that's where the strength comes in, that it takes strength and courage to then take that action that may not be the thing that comes easily or naturally. So I guess you were thinking about how can that help now? Well, I think that, for instance, often we can find that we're really hard on ourselves. This is a common area that kind of limits us or holds us back, right? And so if we think about bringing real awareness and reflection on that, with no judgment, just as it is, really seeing ourselves. And from that place, that's what helps us then grow a sense of understanding and empathy for ourselves. So in this situation, it might be, I'm really scared because my life is not looking the way I kind of expected it to. I'm losing connections and things that I maybe took a bit for granted, and it's hard and it brings up fears. And then from that place of understanding, what's the wise action then that can help ourselves? Because otherwise we might end up kind of trying things and grasping at things that may not just be the right tool for the job, or they might make the problem worse. But if we're first connected with the awareness, and then we come from that place of empathy, we're much more likely to choose an action that's going to be more helpful. So I'd see this as a process that can be helpful at times like this. But also then when we take that action, we need to go back to the beginning again and reflect. Like, was it actually useful? Was it helpful? Maybe we made a mistake.
Right.
Then can we bring the awareness and compassion to that?
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And oh gosh, that touches on so many things and leaves a beautiful open loop for Mary to come back and share more about this. Because just to say in closing that the way you describe fierce compassion, it does sound like an act of bravery. And it also feels like, I guess, stepping off of autopilot. Sometimes I know that I just want to fix the pain. I just want to fix it. And when I come from that fixing energy, I usually don't fix anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we don't need to fix our anxiety in response to COVID, but maybe we need to ask ourselves, well, what is really helpful for us?
Let's leave it there, because I want to say that what's been really helpful for me is just being in this conversation, Mary, being in your energy, taking a few moments to pause and reflect. What a gift. Thank you so much for joining us for 3 Questions Live, although I actually have no idea whether we're live or not. But Mary and I are. Thank you so much, Mary.
It's been a pleasure.
Will you join us again?
I would love to come back.
Thank you so much.